So the title of my paper is Assertion of the Small. It takes an Indian perspective of why small is important in the current world order. It all begins with the small, really. Agreed that scale is everything, but coming from the region that has given the world a zero, I think I'm well within my rights to say that zero is the real big thing. It is small, but what without it? On the 10th of January 2001, Professor Stephen Hawking was in Mumbai at the Shanmukhananda Auditorium. And he presented two projected realities, basically two warnings to the world. He said that the human population, ever since human beings have appeared on Earth, has been growing at an accelerating rate of 1.97% per annum, which means that by 2050, every patch of Earth's land is going to be filled with human beings. The second projected reality which he gave was that ever since electricity has been discovered a couple of, like a century ago, the requirement for electricity in each of the household has been increasing at the same rate of 1.97%, which means that by 2050 we'll be heading into an average Earth temperature of around 50 degrees Celsius. Now, this projected reality by Professor Hawking remains unchanged, at least after 2 decades, when I make this speech in 2017. And elaborating on this point, Nobel laureate Amartya Sen said that people are dying more because of bad technologies as compared to as many for, in terms of natural disasters. We can no longer ignore the fact or the kind of world that we've made for ourselves and the kind of world we're living in. Human beings have become so successful and have been able to relate to each other as species is by their ability to produce institutions. Henry Kissinger, in his book, The World Order, says that one of the most important things that the modern society has given to the mankind is something called as order. It is this order which is being challenged. I'm not saying it is collapsing, but it is critically and very vehemently getting challenged. We need, it's time that we start looking at these institutions like community, religion, government, society, family, etc., more carefully and ask whether these institutions are capable of what human beings need from their lives. Remember, these institutions were made to make our lives more meaningful, more purposeful, and more liberating. A look at our own world. In the 1940s, the critical theory stated that the liberation of human being is from the enslavement of the ideology. When we begin to look at our own world, we see that there are a lot of institutions that were meant to bring out our role as human beings. It is this human beingness which is being challenged. For instance, the male and the female of the same species, are they competing with each other or are they complementing with each other the way it is supposed to be? Scientific advancement has meant, has made that the male and the female of the species do not really need to depend on each other either for progeny or for pleasure. They might actually become competitive species, independent of each other, given that both would be equally intelligent, equally capable of using rationality, and therefore becoming equally powerful. We would be heading towards a very dangerous situation where the man and the woman, although of the same species, would be operating as independent species and, in their own right, becoming competitive. As the social and the political changes and the economics of the world changes, as the world withdraws into a physical loneliness at one end and, at the psychological, cognitive, and spiritual level into a small global village fitting into the new era of globalization, these species are quite likely to be torn apart. Is proudly small enough? It becomes very important at this juncture to understand that zero, to understand that small. We have to find our pride, in our sense of being, in our sense of being of whatever and whoever we are, in being that small. There are two things that we need to do. One, that we need to be proud of whatever and whoever we are. And second, we need to be respectful of the pride of others. Small is accessible. Small is discernible. Small is critically appraisable. It is smaller, it is closer, it's within your grasp. You cannot know the infinity without knowing how many zeros is that one having. So the understanding is very simple. Yes, small, for there is pride and self-respect in it, and hence the small is important. Looking back at whatever Professor Hawking had warned us then, if we try to understand, if we try to solve the gamut of problems or complications from the larger institutions like the state and the international bodies without accommodating, understanding, and respecting the small, then we would be heading towards a very, very dangerous conflict. And where is the next big conflict taking us? It's clearly not taking us into a conventional warfare. It's taking us into a nuclear catastrophe. And what is at the heart of that nuclear catastrophe? It is the small atom. Hence, the understanding of being proud and respectfully small, again, comes at this point. I would be analyzing this from the human scale. I have so far argued that pride and self-respect are necessary in the small. I come from India. We have a very ancient and a very rigid social order called the caste order. The order is extremely discriminatory, it's inhuman, simply because it leaves a lot of the people, at loss over their own lives. They're powerless. They're disintegrated emotionally and also socially. It binds them with socio-cultural, political norms which have lost their sense of purpose and direction. Yet, the order continues. I think this matters because India is also home to the sixth of the human population. The caste order may have worked in producing several thousands of communities in India. Each of these engaged in more or less some kind of an activity, some similar job, or some kind of an assignment. Now, it is this assignment that determines the caste that is assigned to the individual in the community. So you will have people who are dealing with the gods, and you'll also have people dealing with the excreta of the humans. Each of them, performing an essential form of work, performing a job, performing an assignment. Now a physical distance is assigned with a whole new political and social articulation of purity and impurity through the nature of job that they're doing. We're talking about the 21st century as the world's changes have taken over, as there is transition at the global and the national level of power shifts and economic liberalization, and a lot of these amazing revolutions that have been taking place. This order should have disintegrated. It's old, it's rigid, and it's painful to the community. But the order persisted. It continued. And why did it do so? Is because the Indian society actually produced rituals at various levels to have these castes infused into the community, and it did not allow them to disintegrate. Let me broadly divide the three caste orders that I'm talking about. The first are the upper castes, like they call it. They're politically, economically, socially privileged. Some are poor, but caste is seldom one of the reasons. You have the OBCs, which are the other backward castes. Small landowners, small artisans, fragmented communities of work, perhaps suffering extinction in their jobs. They form a large part. And then you have the untouchables, completely ousted from the order in itself, at the lowest rung of the entire, of the order system. All three of them brutally exploited by colonial powers for more than 800 years, as a result of which the backbone of their traditional economic practices is broken today. By rough estimates, these communities comprise of half of India's population. However, within them, these communities are very small, many of them barely 1% or 2% of the entire population. They are small, but they are proud, and they are now coming together. My current Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, belongs to this OBC caste. Everywhere in India you will find that small is asserting itself. It is doing so because it's finding a way through. And how is it finding its way through is because of access to literacy, access to mass media technology, and access to information, which is all pervasive in today's world. In India, there was a recent policy statement which was introduced in the form of a venture capital fund for the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribe communities with an initial capital endowment of rupees $40 billion. Now, these structural economic reforms have given these communities an economic boost to sort of recreate opportunities for themselves. Having said this, coming from India, I look at the global world order in this periscope. I know that the world probably has these three categories: the upper castes, the OBCs, and the untouchables. Let me begin. Who are the untouchables? We know them so well. The small states, completely dependent on tourism, they feel that their economies are their own, but they aren't. Their economies work on the tourists, from the millions of tourists coming from the US, coming from European countries, and coming from the other macro countries. The OBCs, yes, we have a lot of Americas, we have a lot of superpowers, and we also have a lot of Indias, and then the upper castes. I don't think I need to say who belong to this class. The countries that actually dictate the world order. So within the human relations, when we divide these communities, which are divided across the world, exploited by, again, colonialism, globalization, privatization, and decaying capitalistic structures, exploited by every single force that is beginning to reassert, it is not the clash of civilizations that we're witnessing. What we're witnessing is the assertion of the smaller identities. Every country, every nation, every society has a different response to this. So, for example, if we have two men going and shooting a group of cartoonists, what are we disputing? We're disputing the method that has been deployed. Who shall determine what is the right and what is the wrong? On one hand, there is this fantastic, global pressure to sort of globalize the human values. But on the other hand, the question is, are we equipped to really do that? Because in order to do that, we need to sort of accommodate the differences. We need to understand what is the freedom of speech of yours, what is the freedom of speech of mine, who is deciding the I and who's deciding the us. There are questions that are being asked, at least in the media, where you see a lot of these primetime shows, about when I've made it clear that perhaps publishing and printing, the picture of my prophet or something that I don't want you to do, then why do you insist upon doing that? There's a debate of whether this is deliberate or, oh no, was it a mistake? All of these rhetorical questions start clouding the whole idea of globalizing the human values. Now, in order to actually globalize human values at a level where we can get an agreement over the entire value system, this cannot happen if we believe that the Renaissance, it happened only in Italy, or the revolutions that revolutionized the world happened perhaps in America or Russia or Europe. Why haven't we heard of names like Sant Dhyaneshwar? Why haven't we heard of Tukaram? why haven't we heard of Gandhi in this context? You know, why isn't India's freedom struggle that is much talked about but not celebrated as a peaceful transition from one power system to another, a political power system to another, from one economic system to another? These are questions that I actually, leave you all with to think. But what is the next small big thing? It's been a very, very serious, I don't like the faces, it's just a very, very serious conversation. But the next small big, the happier part of the presentation is the family. It is the family what we need to refocus on, because it is the family that has been rigid. It's been a rigid structure. It's been a resilient structure that has faced all sorts of isms. You name capitalism, you name globalization, you name any kind of isms or power struggles, but it has survived and thrived all through. I'd like to quote a line from the Bhagavad Gita, Udara Charitanam Vasudev Kutumbakam. It means that the whole world is a family, and we need, it is an important human, social, and civilizational structure. And while we have understood the individual and the state, it is the family we need to work on, because in the decades to come, it is the family that will be the site of much conflict and much convergence. Thank you so much.